So you have an item, and that item references another item. There's a link between one item and another item. The way that link is forged is you register the ID of the item you want to link to, or you want to create an association with, in the item that's creating the association. We've called those, in other lectures, I've called that the referent. We list the ID of the item we want to link to inside the item that's doing the linking. So the question we're going to handle right now is, so I do that in the schema, I type that into the instance. In the transform, how do I take that ID and use it to get information like the title or the description or whatever I want from the item that I've linked to? Now let me preface this by saying the content of this topic is just at the edge of what I would expect someone in a less technical track to be able to handle conceptually, and it's almost over the edge. In fact, it may be just a little bit over the edge of what I would expect you to perform at. And certainly, by the time we get to the end of this lecture, it's way beyond what I would expect you to perform at. So for the people in a more technical track, I would actually expect you by the end of this course to be able to perform at the level of everything that I cover in this talk. But for the people in a less technical track, I would expect you to at some point get off the conceptual train and to maybe be able to perform at the level of creating a variable and using a variable, which we'll see is in this example from line 86 to line 96. So take that as a consolation if you're in a less technical track, that you will most likely lose the conceptual grip on what I'm saying somewhere along the line here, because it's stuff that you just haven't covered and is more programmer-like. And for the more technical people, you should take this as an indication of the kinds of the distance that I'd like you to go with the more technical concepts of transforms. Okay, so we have an ID, and from that ID we want to get to information that's inside the item that has that ID. And we're going to talk about a number of ways that you can do that. And the first one, and probably the simplest one, is to take that ID and put it inside a variable. So here you see on line 88, I have a XSL variable. And as I've said in other places, the variable is simply a container for holding a text value. In this case, it's a text value. You can do other things, but for our purposes, that's the thing we want to focus on. So I put the value ID1, which I'm going to assume is the ID of some item that I want to get information from, and I put that in the variable. Then from then on, anytime I use this construct right here, $ID, that means that I'm going to access that, and that's exactly equivalent to typing in ID1 here. So instead of saying $ID here, I could have said ID1, and that would have had the same effect, as long as I type the right kind of quotes. That would have the same effect as using the $sign, and it's just convenient for us to put the the variable in an ID, because as you'll see, I'll use that same value ID1 over and over again. So I'd rather put it in a container and use it over and over again. And you can see that after I've defined a variable, I get a pop-up. All I have to do is type $, and it'll give me a choice of all the variables that are at my disposal. Okay, so for example, I have the ID here, ID1, and I want to get the title of the item whose ID is ID1. Backing up again one last time to the context, that ID1 we're assuming was stored inside of item A. Item A points to item B. Item B is in ID1, so this is the ID of item B. I want to get to the title, for example, of item B by using this ID. This XPath will do it for me. And think about this XPath. It's not that complex, and it ought to tell you, in essence, what all the other methods that we'll talk about going forward in this topic are based on. I know the ID of the item, right? So if I know the ID of the item, I can use this XPath item, where ID equals, and what is this? This is ID1. So this little piece of XPath gets me to the item. And from there, I can use whatever XPath I want. Oh, did I make a mistake here? I sure did. That should be whack item. So this is item anywhere in my info base where the ID equals, in this case, ID1. And then from there, I want the title. So this XSL value of statement, what does value of do? It grabs a value out of the instance, is going to select the title of the item whose ID is ID1. Okay, so that's the simplest path we're going to make through this concept. Now let's try one slightly more complex. Now instead of using a straight value of, I'm going to use an XSL for each. And the entire reason I'm going to use this XSL for each is to set the current node to the item whose ID is ID1. And inside this for each, lines 93 and 94, I can assume on the correct item. This simplifies the reading of my transform, and it also allows me to navigate inside that item without continually having to type the same base part of the XPath. I could have typed this over and over again like I did here. If I wanted the author, I would repeat line 90 again, except instead of title I would say author. But it's much more convenient for me, and actually makes for an easier to read and an easier to change transform if I wrap all my access to information in that item inside a for each. So once again, the for each on line 92 is doing nothing but setting the current node to the one I want it to be. I want the current node to be the item whose ID is ID1. Okay, so that's pass number 2. Method number 1 is on line 90. Method number 2 is on line 92 through 95. Now let's go on